Tacoma. Now, I did a video before about, just prior to this, about what I love about Tacoma. I did a video about what I love about Seattle and what I dislike about Seattle. So now it's Tacoma's turn. And like I said with the Seattle video, there's more things I love about Tacoma, just like there's more things I love about Seattle versus dislikes. But I feel like it deserves its chance so that people can, kind of gauge on their own views and just kind of see where I'm coming from with it. Of course, you should always go there and experience it on your own, but there are a few things I dislike. Let me first go off the top, crime. Now, while I mentioned in the video what I love about Tacoma, Tacoma has by far less crime than what you may expect in some other places. So even when you're looking at towns that are much, much more bigger or smaller than Tacoma, Tacoma's still going to have a lot less crime. But when you compare, for example, murders in Tacoma to Seattle, even though the numbers in both cities are very small compared to other cities like that. For example, Albuquerque, which is roughly is smaller than Seattle in terms of the city limits, but bigger than Tacoma. Albuquerque has by far more murders than Tacoma does. To give you an idea, I think Tacoma had, and it's a city of about 200 and something thousand, I believe now, but Tacoma had maybe, I'm wanting to say, less than 30 murders, I believe, something like that, much less than 30 murders. I think that Seattle is definitely under 50, and we're talking a big city. So Tacoma does, given the population size, it does have more murders than Seattle. Now, is it so scary that I don't want to live there? No, because Indianapolis has 3-4 times as much, maybe 5 times as much murders than Tacoma has. Chicago by far more than any place in the country, it seems. Albuquerque, as I mentioned, has much more. To be honest with you, the crime rate in Tacoma is pretty low. If you're coming from someplace else and you're moving here, more than likely you're going to say there's not a whole lot of crime. Now, it makes the news here because people hear of maybe the occasional drive-by. I shouldn't say occasional, but there might be a drive-by that happens amongst gang members. Now, let's rewind a little bit back and talk about Tacoma's history and where it was and where has come to now. I mentioned in what I love about Tacoma about Hilltop. Hilltop back in the, I'm wanting to say 70s or maybe 80s, used to be gangland. I remember watching a documentary somewhere, and I remember people saying, oh, I remember, I used to live back in Tacoma back then, and they said you would see people roaming downtown and prostitutes roaming downtown and all types of stuff going on from Hilltop down to downtown because they're very close. It was just crazy, and shootouts and everything, and there was a time when a marshal had a shootout on the streets in Hilltop with a bunch of gang members, and that there was a huge Hispanic gang that had moved in there into Tacoma, and they had mentioned that most of them had died due to gang-related activities, and the others just ended up leaving, and that there was a huge African-American gang problem down there and that type of thing, and you couldn't even it was just dangerous. Now, those same areas that used to be gangland, families have moved in. So there's massive gentrification. So again, how do you view that? It's good on one end that gangs are gone, but some of the other people who had nothing to do with gangs are now kind of getting pushed out because people like us are moving there because it's more affordable than Seattle, but they're sprucing up houses, putting a lot of investment into the houses that are there, and then the property tax goes up so high that the original folks who lived there for 50, 60 years are now kind of getting pushed out due to the taxes being so high. That happens here in Seattle quite a bit as well. So, it depends on how you view it, but the crime rate in Tacoma by far is much less than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago. It's by far much less. A lot of the violence in terms of like murders and stuff happens between the last remaining remnants of gangs. Tacoma has been making a huge pitch to improve its image and to improve the city, to where they've actually started attacking these gangs quite heavily, and it's driving the numbers down. They're putting a lot of them in jail and that type of thing. So the crime rate, while it's still there, is just a fraction of what it used to be. It's much safer to be there now than it ever has been. They've also invested into downtown, so you don't have the dilapidation and the neglect that you had before. They've invested millions and millions and millions of dollars. As I mentioned, they put in, the museum campus. University of Washington is also downtown there as well. They put in the light rail system. So they've dumped tons of money, the waterfront, tons of money, and it's made a huge difference. Now you're seeing all types of buildings go up. But if I have to mention a dislike, it is that there's a little bit more crime there that you probably will see versus, say, Seattle. But it's still very small. The dislike that I mentioned before is traffic. I know that's a common theme, but it is the case here in this area. The Puget Sound region, which is basically from the Canadian border all the way down to Olympia, I guess, is the Puget Sound region. It's just, traffic is a nightmare. It's really, really bad. One of the issues is that the spine of traffic is I-5. And so just because you have one interstate and you have 5 million people in this area, you're going to understand how bad traffic can be. There's a lot of other roads you can use to actually get to Seattle from Tacoma, but these are like tiny roads with stop signs, things like that. So it'll take you a million years just to get from Tacoma up to Seattle if you take those back roads. But traffic is really bad. Now in Tacoma itself, traffic is not so bad. You don't have the huge problem with gridlock streets and rush hour being so crazy that you just, pull your hair out. But you do have traffic when it comes to leaving Tacoma and going any place outside of there, usually the interstate. There's a lot of road construction that's going on down there too, because they understand that Tacoma is about to pop. And what I mean by that is that I have a feeling that Tacoma will soon explode with population, because again, as I mentioned, they're building the train system, the light rail train down there eventually if Transit 3 passes. And so that's just going to make it a lot easier to get to Seattle. They're expanding the Sounder station, or actually they're expanding Amtrak and Sounder station down there in the Freight House Square, so there's construction there. There's construction on the railroad system, bridges, overpasses, the interstate. Everything is being expanded in terms of roads, so it makes that area around the dome, the Tacoma Dome, that area just really, really bad. So it's to be expected. One of the things that you might find kind of funny is that this is a kind of a concern, not necessarily a dislike, but it's a fear or maybe a concern. You're not too far from Mount Everest, or Mount Everest. You're not too far from Mount Rainier. I was just reading something about Mount Everest, so it just stuck. But you're not too far from Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is an active volcano, just like Mount St. Helens is a little bit farther down. Mount Rainier is an active volcano, and that means that it can at any point in time just pop. If that's the case, then you have Tacoma's in an area that was created by volcanoes. I mean, it's got, if you look at how the city is laid out, and they were talking about in the past when there was, a lava flow, and we're talking long time ago before people really were around here, that basically it is kind of like a funnel. When you look at where the port is and all of that, which is right there in downtown, it's just like a funnel. So if that were to pop, then by Tacoma. However, when will that happen? It could happen tomorrow. It could happen maybe in 200 years. But that is one of those types of concerns that you have to really think about. It's the same with earthquakes. We're on a fault line, so Seattle is at danger, all of this area is at danger, so how do you really gauge that? To me, I look at it like this. There's so many benefits of living here that is a least concern type of thing for me. Would it be massive and destructive? Sure, but I mean, every place has their own natural disasters, but that's probably one of the small concerns that I have about Tacoma. One of the other things that I kind of dislike about Tacoma, and this is, I mean, again, these are kind of like nitpicky because, again, it's hard to find things that I don't really like about Tacoma. But what I really kind of don't like is that the school districts down there, and this is an important thing, it is a family town, but some of the school districts are not that good. And when I say not that good, I'm talking they're really bad. And it goes back to the history of Tacoma, where at the time Tacoma was starting to sink as a city because, again, it had a crime problem. Now that so many people have moved in and so much investment has come to the city, those things are clearing up, but the remnants of poor schools are still there. So in some areas where you have opulent houses and all this nice stuff, if you look at the grade average for those cities, or for those schools, I'm sorry, it is not that good. Then if you go just over a little bit, those schools are amazing. So it's kind of hit and miss wherever you go, and it doesn't necessarily correlate as much with income. So sometimes here in Seattle you can say, oh well, that's a wealthy neighborhood, schools are going to be great. It's not that way down in Tacoma. Some areas where there's really expensive houses, sometimes the schools have a low grade. Sometimes in areas where the houses are not that spectacular, the grade is not that bad. So it's kind of one of those things where they're trying to balance all of that out. But it is something that I kind of don't really like. But there's options here. A lot of people do homeschooling, that type of thing. You can always send them to these public schools, which are improving. I should say they're all improving. But you can send them to a public school and then also kind of back that up with at-home learning and all this other stuff. But that is something that is a concern of mine. That is pretty much it. And I had to really think about things that I disliked about Tacoma. Because it is truly a city that is quite remarkable. But there are, like I said, there's some concerns. From the traffic issue to some of the minor crime issue that does happen down there, to the fact that, you know, the school district can improve a little bit more than what is going on, but it is working. I would have to say that I wish there was more taller buildings. I like taller buildings. However, that goes back to the problem of what Seattle is going through. More big, tall buildings in a small area brings more people, more congestion, and more parking problems, which Tacoma doesn't really have. It doesn't have parking problems necessarily. It doesn't have clogged streets. It doesn't have those types of things. So Tacoma is ahead of the game in terms of its mass transit situation, which Seattle is behind the game. So that's pretty much all I have in terms of what I dislike about Tacoma. Hope you enjoy the video, and until next time, I'll see you. Take care.